You're on your knees again, making promises you've made 1,000 times before, swearing this is the last time, the absolute last time. But even as the words leave your mouth, part of you already knows the truth. You'll be back here. You always come back, and everyone tells you the same thing. You're weak. You're broken. You lack discipline. You need to try harder, pray harder, want it more. But what if everything they've told you about your addiction is a lie? Carl Jung discovered something so dangerous that religion itself couldn't accept it. Your addiction is not a curse. It's a calling card from God. A brutal, specific language that the divine uses only with souls marked for transformation. The ones too rare, too deep, too dangerously awake to ever be satisfied with ordinary existence. While the world condemns you, Jung saw the truth. Addiction is not human weakness, it's divine selection. The endless craving, the guilt, the cycle of rising and falling that never seems to end. None of it is random. It's dialogue. God is speaking directly to you through the very thing that's destroying you. And only those chosen for something extraordinary experience this conversation with such devastating intensity. Do you feel trapped by desires you can't explain? Caught in a pattern you can't break no matter how hard you try? That's not your failure. That's the sign. Because Jung discovered that the souls who suffer most from addiction are the same souls destined to understand what most humans will never touch. The nature of suffering itself. The architecture of the shadow. The direct line between human hunger and divine purpose. Most people can drink without becoming addicted. Most people can experience pleasure without losing themselves. They can stop. They can walk away. But you cannot. And that's not your weakness. That's your proof. Before you condemn yourself one more time, listen. Your addiction may be the most intimate conversation you've ever had with God, and it can only be heard by those chosen to awaken. There's a hunger living inside you that nothing satisfies. Nothing. You've tried everything. Substances, people, achievements, distractions, validation, control, spirituality, therapy, medication. You consume and consume and consume, but the emptiness returns. Stronger, deeper, more demanding than before, like a black hole that only grows larger the more you feed it. Jung called this the spiritual thirst. And he believed that every addiction begins as a search for something sacred, something lost. When your addiction calls and you reach for that drink, that drug, that forbidden pleasure, you're not being weak. You're responding to a call you don't yet understand. Your soul is screaming for meaning, and addiction is the only language it knows how to speak. This thirst is ancient. It's been with humanity since the first human looked up at the stars and felt that aching sense of separation from something infinite. But here's what separates you from everyone else. Not everyone feels it with the same intensity. Only certain souls carry this burden, this relentless craving that refuses to be ignored, this divine restlessness that won't let them settle into comfortable numbness like everyone else. These are the ones Jung identified as chosen, marked by God for something they don't yet understand. You see, most people can have one drink and put the bottle down. Most people can dabble in pleasure without being consumed by it. They have natural boundaries, natural limits. They can moderate, control, walk away whenever they choose. But you've never been able to do that, ever. One is never enough. A little is never enough. And you've spent years hating yourself for it, believing something is fundamentally wrong with you. But what if it's the opposite? What if your inability to be satisfied is actually proof of your calling? The thirst that cannot be quenched is evidence that something greater is trying to reach you, trying to pull you toward a transformation you keep resisting. The more you suffer from this hunger, the louder God's message becomes. Jung discovered that alcoholics in particular carried a unique spiritual wound. He saw that their addiction wasn't about the alcohol itself. It was about the desperate attempt to touch something transcendent, something beyond the mundane reality that felt too small, too flat, too lifeless for their souls. They drank to feel connected, to feel alive, to feel God, to feel anything other than the suffocating emptiness of a world without magic, without meaning, without the sacred. In those moments of intoxication, they caught glimpses of something more, a sense of expansion, of unity, of finally being enough, of finally touching the infinite they'd been searching for their entire lives. But the glimpses never lasted. They couldn't. Because here's the cruel twist that Jung understood. The addiction itself becomes the barrier. The very thing you use to satisfy your spiritual thirst becomes the thing that keeps you thirsty. You drink to feel whole, but the drinking fractures you further. You chase the high to escape the pain, but the high deepens the pain. You seek God through the substance, but the substance blocks God completely. It's a paradox, a cycle that seems designed to break you. Yet Jung insisted this was intentional. This cycle is not random chaos, it's a divine mechanism, a spiritual test designed specifically for those strong enough to endure it. God does not speak to everyone through addiction because not everyone needs this particular lesson. But for those who do, the message is always the same. What you seek outside yourself can only be found within. The paradise you're trying to reach through external means is actually an internal state you've forgotten how to access. The connection you're desperate to feel already exists, but you're looking in the wrong direction. The spiritual thirst you feel is real, but you've been trying to satisfy a spiritual need with material solutions. You've been trying to fill a God-shaped hole with things that can never fit. And every time you try, the hole grows larger, the thirst grows stronger, and you feel more lost than before. This is where most people give up. They see the endless cycle and conclude they're broken, cursed, fundamentally unworthy of peace or connection or God's love. But Jung saw something different. He saw that the intensity of your craving is proportional to the depth of your calling. The more you suffer, the greater your potential for awakening. The spiritual thirst that cannot be quenched is not your punishment. It's your preparation. God speaks to his chosen ones through this impossible hunger, because only through it can they learn the most important truth. Nothing in this world will ever be enough. Not success, not love, not power, not pleasure, not even the substance you're addicted to. Nothing. And once you truly understand this, once you stop fighting it and start listening to it, the spiritual thirst begins to transform. It stops being about filling yourself and starts being about emptying yourself. It stops being about escape and starts being about encounter. The craving that once drove you to destruction becomes the doorway to something you never imagined possible, a direct connection to the divine source that's been calling you all along. But you cannot reach this point while you're still fighting. You cannot hear God's message while you're drowning in guilt and shame. You must first accept that your addiction is not your enemy. It's your teacher, your guide. The thorn in your flesh that will not let you rest until you finally turn inward and face what you've been running from. The spiritual thirst will never be quenched by anything outside you. That's the brutal truth Jung understood. But here's the hope. It was never meant to be. The thirst is the call. The craving is the invitation. And your addiction is the only thing powerful enough to force you to finally answer. The sacred descent. Why you must keep falling. You've tried to quit 1,000 times. You've made promises to yourself, to others, to God, that this time would be different, that this would be the last time, that you'd finally find the strength to walk away and never look back. And yet, you fell. Again and again and again. Each relapse feels like proof of your failure. Evidence that you're too weak, too broken, too far gone to ever be saved. The shame compounds with each fall, the self-hatred deepens, and you begin to believe that maybe you're just fundamentally flawed in a way that can never be fixed. But what if I told you that falling is not the opposite of rising? What if every collapse is actually a step forward in a journey you don't yet understand? Jung believed that the repeated cycle of addiction and relapse wasn't a sign of failure, but a necessary descent into the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life avoiding. He called it the encounter with the shadow. This is the dark side of your personality, the aspects of yourself you reject, deny, and bury deep beneath the surface. Your anger, your shame, your fear, your hidden desires, your selfishness, your weakness. Everything you pretend doesn't exist. Everything you've been taught is unacceptable. But your addiction has a way of dragging all of it into the light. Every time you fall, every time your addiction wins again, you're forced to confront something true about yourself. Something you would never face if life were comfortable, if you could maintain your social masks and polite pretenses. The addict cannot hide. The addiction strips away all the layers, all the defenses, until you're standing naked before yourself and before God. And that's precisely the point. Most people go through life never truly knowing themselves. They build identities based on what others expect, what society approves, what feels safe. They perform their assigned roles and never question whether the person they're presenting to the world has any relationship to who they actually are. But the chosen ones, the ones marked by addiction, don't have that luxury. They're forced into the depths whether they want to go or not. And every fall takes them deeper. Jung understood that this descent is sacred. In ancient myths and spiritual traditions, the hero always has to descend into the underworld before they can ascend to the heavens. They have to face the monsters, the demons, the parts of themselves they fear most. They have to die before they can be reborn. Your addiction is your underworld. Every relapse is another layer peeled away, another illusion shattered, another false self destroyed. It feels like death because in a way it is, but death is not the end. It's the beginning of transformation. And God speaks most clearly in the places where you feel most lost. The falling is not random. It follows a pattern, a rhythm that Jung recognized as deeply spiritual. You rise with hope. You fall with despair. You rise again with determination. You fall again with guilt, over and over and over. And each cycle teaches you something essential. You cannot save yourself through willpower alone. This is the hardest lesson for the chosen ones to learn because most of you are fighters. You're strong, capable, used to conquering obstacles through force of will. You've succeeded at other things in life through discipline and determination. But addiction doesn't respond to force. The harder you fight it, the stronger it becomes. The more you resist it, the tighter its grip. It's like trying to escape quicksand. Every struggle pulls you deeper, and so you must learn to stop fighting and start surrendering. Surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing that you're facing something more powerful than your ego, something that requires a different kind of strength. It means admitting that you need help, that you cannot do this alone, that the path forward is not up but down. Further into the darkness, further into the unknown, further into the shadow, into the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life running from. Jung found that those who eventually break free from addiction don't do so by conquering it. They do so by integrating it. They stop seeing their shadow as the enemy and start seeing it as a part of themselves that needs to be understood, accepted, and transformed. They stop fighting the fall and start learning from it. Each time you collapse, you're being given a gift, a chance to see yourself more clearly. A chance to understand why you crave what you crave, why you run from what you run from, why you hurt in the ways you hurt. And with each fall, if you're willing to look, you come closer to the truth that will set you free. The path is not a straight line upward. It's a spiral downward, and then upward again and again until you finally reach the center. And at the center, you'll find what you've been searching for all along. Not in the substance, not in the high, not in the escape, but in the person you become through the journey of falling and rising, breaking and healing, dying and being reborn. Your shadow knows who you really are. There's a part of you that watches from the corner of your mind. It knows every secret you keep, every lie you tell yourself, every moment of weakness you pretend never happened, every shameful thought you've never spoken out loud. This isn't your conscience. This is something older, something deeper, something that's been with you since birth, growing stronger with every truth you refuse to face. Jung called it the shadow, and your addiction feeds on it. Your addiction thrives in the darkness of everything you deny about yourself. The rage you swallow instead of expressing, the pain you ignore instead of feeling, the desires you label as shameful instead of accepting. The parts of yourself you've been taught are unacceptable, immoral, unlovable. All of it gets pushed down into this hidden place, and there it waits, gaining power, growing larger, until one day it erupts in ways you cannot control. You think your addiction is about weakness, about lack of willpower, about some fundamental character flaw. But Jung saw it differently. He understood that addiction is the shadow's way of forcing itself into your awareness. It's not trying to destroy you. It's trying to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged, because what you refuse to face in the light will eventually consume you in the dark. Every craving carries a message from your shadow. When your addiction whispers and you reach for that drink, that drug, that destructive behavior, you're not simply seeking pleasure or escape. You're responding to a part of yourself that's been silenced for too long. A part that holds truths you're terrified to admit. A part that knows exactly who you are beneath all the masks you wear. The real you. The complete you. The you that exists before social conditioning and religious shame and family expectations. Most people spend their entire lives running from their shadow. They build comfortable lives, surround themselves with distractions, and never look too closely at the darkness within. They maintain the illusion of being good, moral, acceptable. They split themselves in two, keeping the socially approved self on display while locking everything else in the basement. But God doesn't choose those people for this particular journey. He chooses the ones who cannot run, the ones whose shadows refuse to stay hidden, the ones whose inner darkness becomes so loud it drowns out everything else. This is why your addiction feels so powerful, so overwhelming, so impossible to resist. It's not just a habit or a chemical dependency. It's your shadow demanding recognition. And the more you fight it, the more you judge it, the more you hate yourself for it, the stronger your shadow becomes. Because shadows grow in proportion to the light you try to force upon them. Jung discovered something revolutionary. You cannot kill your shadow. You cannot pray it away, discipline it away, or shame it away. The shadow is not some external demon that's possessed you. It's you. It's the parts of yourself you've disowned, the aspects of your humanity you've rejected because they didn't fit into the acceptable narrative of who you were supposed to be. The only way forward is through integration. You must turn toward the darkness, look it in the face, and say its name. You must acknowledge the parts of yourself you've spent years denying, the anger, the selfishness, the fear, the weakness, the hunger for things you were taught to reject, the desires that make you human but that you've labeled as sinful, shameful, wrong. This is terrifying work. It requires a kind of courage most people will never need, because when you finally look at your shadow, you see everything you've been taught to despise. You see the monster you were convinced you could never be. You see the truth that society, family, religion, all told you to hide. And in that moment, you have a choice. Reject it again and sink deeper into addiction, or accept it and begin the process of transformation. The chosen ones are given this burden because they have the capacity to bear it. God knows that not everyone can face their shadow and survive. Not everyone can stare into their own darkness without being consumed by it. But those marked by addiction have no choice. Their shadow will not let them rest. It will keep pushing, keep demanding, keep destroying everything they build until they finally stop running and turn around. When you do, something unexpected happens. The shadow doesn't destroy you. Instead, it reveals gifts you never knew you had. Hidden within your darkness are strengths you suppressed, talents you ignored, truths you were afraid to speak. Your shadow knows who you really are, stripped of all pretense and social conditioning. And once you integrate it, once you accept it as part of yourself, the addiction begins to lose its power. Because addiction only has control when you're divided against yourself. When part of you wants to stop and another part cannot. When your conscious mind says no, but your shadow says yes, this internal war is exhausting, and the addiction feeds on that exhaustion. But when you finally make peace with your shadow, when you stop fighting yourself and start understanding yourself, the war ends. Jung believed that this integration was the true goal of spiritual development, not perfection, not purity, not becoming some idealized version of yourself, but wholeness. Becoming complete by accepting all parts of yourself, light and dark, good and bad, noble and shameful, sacred and profane. This is what it means to be truly human. This is what God is trying to teach His chosen ones through the brutal classroom of addiction. Your shadow knows your name because it is you. And until you acknowledge it, until you speak its name out loud and claim it as your own, you will never be free. The addiction will continue because the shadow will continue demanding to be seen. But once you do this work, once you face what you've been running from, something miraculous happens. The craving that once controlled you becomes a compass pointing toward your hidden self. The addiction that once destroyed you becomes the catalyst for your greatest transformation. And the shadow that once terrified you becomes your most trusted guide into the depths of your own soul. The God-shaped void. Nothing can fill. The bottle promises peace but delivers chaos. The substance offers freedom but brings chains. The behavior guarantees pleasure but produces pain. This is the great deception of addiction, and Jung understood it completely. What you crave is never what you actually need. You already know this. Every time your addiction wins and you give in to the craving, there's a moment of relief, maybe even euphoria. But it never lasts. Within hours, sometimes minutes, the emptiness returns, deeper than before, hungrier than before, more demanding than before, and you find yourself right back where you started. Except now you carry the additional weight of guilt and shame. Now you have to face the consequences. Now you have to explain to yourself again why you did the thing you swore you'd never do again. This cycle isn't an accident, it's a design. Because the craving is not about the substance or the behavior at all. It's about something missing inside you, something that's been absent for so long you've forgotten what it feels like. Jung called this the God-shaped void, and he believed that every addiction is ultimately a misdirected search for the divine. You're looking for transcendence in a bottle. You're searching for meaning in a high. You're trying to find God in behaviors that isolate you from God. The direction is wrong, but the impulse is sacred. Deep within your soul, you know there's something more, something greater, something beyond the ordinary experience of life. And you'll do anything to touch it, even if it destroys you in the process. This is why simple solutions never work. People tell you to just stop, to have more willpower, to think about the consequences, but they don't understand that your addiction is not about the thing itself. It's about what that thing represents. It's a symbol, a placeholder for the spiritual connection you've lost or never had. When you drink, you're not really drinking. You're trying to dissolve the barriers between yourself and something infinite. When you use, you're not really seeking a high. You're trying to escape the prison of your limited perception. When your addiction calls and you engage in destructive behaviors, you're not really pursuing pleasure. You're trying to feel alive in a world that has made you numb. Jung saw this pattern in every addict he worked with. They weren't morally weak or fundamentally flawed. They were spiritually hungry in a world that had forgotten how to feed the soul. They were seeking God in all the wrong places because nobody had taught them where to look. And their addiction was both the problem and the pointer. simultaneously destroying them and showing them what they truly needed. The great tragedy is that what you crave will never satisfy the need beneath it. You can drink an ocean and still be thirsty. You can chase every high and still feel empty. You can engage in the behavior 1,000,000 times and still feel disconnected. Because you're using finite things to satisfy an infinite hunger. You're using material solutions for spiritual problems, and it will never, ever work. But here's where the teaching becomes profound. The fact that nothing satisfies you is not a curse. It's a clue. It's God whispering through your dissatisfaction, telling you that you were made for something more. Your inability to be content with ordinary pleasures is actually evidence of your extraordinary calling. You're marked by divine restlessness, and that restlessness will not let you settle until you find what you're truly looking for. The shift happens when you stop trying to satisfy the craving and start investigating it. When your addiction whispers and you pause before reaching for your substance and ask, what am I really looking for right now? What do I hope this will give me? Connection, peace, escape, meaning, God? And then you ask the deeper question, where can I actually find that? This is when the addiction begins to transform from master to teacher. The craving becomes a signal, alerting you to unmet needs, unhealed wounds, unfulfilled spiritual longings. Instead of judging it or fighting it, you start listening to it. You start treating it as valuable information about your inner world, about your soul's deepest hunger. What you crave is not what you need. The alcohol is not the answer. The drug is not the solution. The behavior is not the cure. But the craving itself, when properly understood, becomes the map that leads you home. It shows you exactly what's missing, exactly what your soul is starving for, exactly where you need to direct your attention. And when you finally give yourself what you actually need, when you feed your soul instead of your addiction, something shifts. The craving doesn't disappear immediately, but it changes quality. It becomes less desperate, less consuming, less powerful, because you're no longer trying to fill a spiritual void with material things. You're finally addressing the real hunger that's been driving you all along. There's a wound inside you that never closes. You've tried everything to make it go away. You've numbed it with your addiction, ignored it with distractions, covered it with achievements and relationships in constant motion. But no matter what you do, it remains raw, open, bleeding beneath the surface of your carefully constructed life. Jung understood that some wounds are not meant to heal in the conventional sense. They're not mistakes or accidents or punishments. They're sacred marks, placed deliberately on souls chosen for a specific purpose. These wounds are doorways, and your addiction is what keeps forcing you back to stand in front of them, whether you want to or not. Most people have pain in their lives. Everyone experiences loss, betrayal, disappointment, trauma. But for some, the pain runs deeper. It becomes woven into the fabric of who they are. It shapes every decision, colors every relationship, drives every self-destructive behavior. And no amount of therapy, medication, or positive thinking seems to touch it. This is the sacred wound. It's the thorn in your flesh that will not be removed no matter how much you beg God to take it away. It's the burden you carry that makes you different from everyone around you. And Jung believed it was the price of being chosen. The mark that separates those destined for ordinary lives from those called to extraordinary transformation. Your addiction exists in direct relationship to this wound. When the pain becomes unbearable, your addiction offers relief. When the wound tears open again, you seek your escape. The addiction and the wound are locked in an eternal dance, each one feeding the other, each one keeping you trapped in a cycle that feels impossible to break. But here's what Jung discovered. The wound is not your enemy. It's your greatest teacher. Every time it opens, every time it bleeds, every time it reminds you of its presence, it's trying to show you something essential about your purpose, The sacred wound contains the very thing you came here to learn, to heal in others, to transform into wisdom. Think about it. The deepest wounds create the deepest sensitivity. The person who's never experienced abandonment cannot truly understand someone who has. The person who's never felt soul-crushing shame cannot sit with someone drowning in it. But you can. Your wound has given you access to levels of human suffering that most people will never comprehend. And that access is not random, it's intentional. God wounds his chosen ones in specific ways because he needs them to reach specific people. Your pain is not meaningless. It's preparation. Every moment you've spent in the darkness, every night you've cried yourself to sleep, every time you've wanted to give up, you are being trained to understand, to empathize, to guide others who will one day walk the same path. But you cannot access this gift while you're still fighting the wound, while you're still trying to make it disappear, still treating it as something wrong with you, still believing that healing means never hurting again. Jung taught that true healing is not the absence of the wound, but the transformation of your relationship to it. The sacred wound becomes sacred when you stop seeing it as your weakness and start seeing it as your strength. When you stop asking why it happened to you and start asking what it's trying to teach you. When you stop demanding that it close and start learning to live with it open, using it as a source of compassion rather than a source of shame. This is incredibly difficult work because everything in you wants the pain to stop. You want to be normal, to be free of this burden, to live without this constant ache in your chest. But the wound refuses. It keeps reopening, keeps demanding attention, keeps forcing you back into the pain you desperately want to escape. And your addiction becomes the only relief you can find. Jung saw this pattern clearly. The addict runs from the wound into the addiction, but the addiction eventually drives them back to the wound. It's a cruel circle, but also a sacred one, because each time you return, you have the opportunity to see the wound differently, to understand it more deeply, to recognize that it's not destroying you, but refining you. The chosen ones carry wounds that refuse to heal because those wounds are meant to stay open. Not forever in the same way, but open as channels, as pathways, as points of connection between their pain and the pain of others. The wound that will not close becomes the very thing that allows grace to flow through you. It becomes the crack where the light gets in, the broken place where healing begins for everyone you touch. Your addiction has been protecting you from the full weight of this sacred wound. It's been a buffer, a shield, a way to survive pain that felt unsurvivable. And perhaps it was necessary for a time. Perhaps you needed that protection until you were strong enough to face what lies beneath. But eventually, the protection becomes the prison. The very thing that helped you survive becomes the thing that prevents you from living. When you're ready, when the pain of staying the same finally exceeds the fear of change, you'll begin to approach your wound differently. Not with hatred or shame, but with curiosity. Not demanding that it disappear, but asking what it has to teach you. And in that moment of turning toward instead of away, everything shifts. The wound doesn't close, but it transforms. It becomes less about your personal suffering and more about your shared humanity. It becomes less about what was done to you and more about what you can offer others. It becomes the source of your greatest gift, the ability to sit with someone in their darkest moment and say, without words, I know. I've been there. You are not alone. This is why God speaks to his chosen ones through addiction and through wounds that refuse to heal. Because only those who have descended into the deepest darkness can guide others out of it. Only those who have carried unbearable pain can help others bear theirs. And only those who have learned to live with a sacred wound can teach others that brokenness is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new one. So now you stand at the edge of understanding, looking back at everything the fire has revealed. The spiritual thirst that could not be quenched was teaching you that nothing in this world will ever be enough. The falling that felt like failure was actually the sacred descent you needed to meet your truest self. The shadow that terrified you was simply waiting to be recognized, to be integrated, to become your guide instead of your tormentor. The craving that consumed you was always pointing towards something deeper, something sacred that you were seeking in all the wrong places. And the wound that refused to heal became the very crack through which your light now shines. This is what Jung understood and what few others have dared to say. Your addiction was never the enemy, it was the messenger. God's specific language for souls marked for transformation. God does not speak to everyone through such devastating means because not everyone needs to be broken open in this particular way. But you did, and now you know why. You were chosen not for comfort, but for transformation. Not for ease, but for depth. Not to live a simple life, but to walk a path that would forge you into something unbreakable. Every moment of suffering, every relapse, every shame-filled morning, every desperate prayer, it was all preparation. You were being trained in the darkness so you could carry light into places where others cannot go. The conversation is not over. God is still speaking through your struggles, through your questions, through your ongoing journey with addiction. But now you can finally hear him. Not in the noise of your addiction, but in the silence after you stop running. Not in the high, but in the hunger that the high could never satisfy. Not in the escape, but in the return to yourself again and again, no matter how many times you fall. You are awake now, and that changes everything. The addiction may not disappear overnight. The wound may never fully close. The shadow may always whisper from the corners of your mind, but you understand them differently now. They are not your enemies. They are your teachers. They are the language God chose to speak to you because you are one of the rare ones who can bear to hear it. You were marked for this, selected from the beginning, set apart not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough to be broken and still choose to rise. The spiritual thirst will guide you home. The sacred descent will teach you who you really are. The shadow will show you your hidden gifts. The craving will point you toward what you truly need. And the wound will become the source of your greatest gift to others. This is the secret Jung discovered. This is the truth that religion could never accept. Your addiction is not your curse. It is your calling card from God. The most intimate conversation you've ever had with the divine. And now that you can finally hear the message, everything begins.